welcome. We had an opportunity to chat virtually before the panel, so it's wonderful to meet you in person. Tetiana, Admiral. The topic of this panel ties a bit to what General Cavalli was already speaking about. It's the idea of citizen soldier, but with a special focus on national security affairs. And full disclosure, let me tell you what inspired me to suggest that we do this panel. About 3 months into my return to Washington, D.C., I was having dinner with a number of friends who work in policy. And at some point, I asked them if they felt responsible for national defense in the most literal sense. And one of them answered, I pay taxes, we have a professional military. Why should I be involved directly? So I was trying to be a smart aleck, and I said, so you think of the military like a security guard at the mall, right? He laughed, he said, of course not, but that really shook me. So I wrote an article for Real Clear Defense arguing for the return to national service. Not only because we need reserves, we need the capacity, but also because we need a space in every democratic society where young men and women can meet, discover that they owe something to each other, and that there is a larger nation out there, that national security is not just about becoming a security consumer, but also about being somebody who takes responsibility for the security of us all. So in that context, I would like to invite maybe first you, Admiral, to offer a few comments. Then I'll move to Tetiana and then to our third panelist, because I want to tease out some of those aspects of how national security requirements and the role of the citizen intertwine and get the experience of people who are extensively involved with their own militaries, if you look at the biographies of our speakers, or represent a nation that's now fighting for its survival. So, Admiral, without further ado, over to you, please.
Well, thank you, Andrew. Some of you remember probably world-known Belgian actor called Jean-Claude Van Damme. 20 years ago, everybody made fun of him because he was always using the same word, aware. You have to be aware. If you have a look on Google, you will find many jokes. Unfortunately, for the people who were making fun of him, he was probably right. And now in 2014, we know of it. We have to be conscious of what is happening to us. We had some very interesting, given the subject today, on this panel, very interesting speeches from a former Prime Minister and from Secure General Cavalli, talking about civic education, talking about the consciousness we must have, and what we have to define now is to be conscious of what. What is the real thing? The first thing, and I'm referring to what General Cavalli said, citizenship. We in the Western world, and all of us do belong to this Western world, have something we should treasure and which we probably do not treasure enough, being the fact that we are citizens. It goes back nearly 1,000 years ago with the Magna Carta in 1215, given to the English people, with the ideas of 1776, and I'm referring, of course, to the United States of America, referring to the French Revolution, 1789, and I could go on, 1830 Belgium, 1860 Italy, and so on and so forth. It goes back a very long way in history because all of us, individuals, had the consciousness of belonging to a nation which has become a nation state. And for this, as was said this morning, we have to fight for our freedom. We have to fight for our liberty. Probably we took a nap and we went to sleep in 1945, roughly, ending in 2001 for different reasons. And we do belong to two generations who were lucky enough not to know a full-fledged war. War has come back not only in Afghanistan, but in Ukraine in 2022. Now, what does it mean to be a soldier? First a citizen and second a soldier, and not the other way around. It means many things. It means, as was stated, that you have to refer to a constitution. In the French armed forces, when you take a new command, you have nearly the same wording as in the US armed forces. You will have to fight for the honor of the French weapons, for the respect of the law. And this is said each time we take a new command. And it is said publicly in front of your crew, of your troops, of your regiment, whatever. This does mean something. It means first that we soldiers, have to be neutral. Some people do forget it. This is why normally you wouldn't hear any active duty soldier taking sides in any political fight. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have his own vote. Thank God he's allowed to vote. 1944 in France only. But it means we do not have to take sides, and we have to abide by the law, we have to abide by our constitution, and we have to obey our orders as long as they are not against international law. That's quite obvious. Second thing is we have to, I wouldn't say teach, but to explain to our fellow citizens who are not on active duty what we are doing and why we are doing it. One of the options could be, but we could come back to it, the national military service, for many reasons which we could discuss. It may be or may not be a good option, depending on the size, depending on the time, depending on many other systems. But at least we need some reserves. And we need to keep, and the mayor of Kiev was very interesting, we need to keep a fighting spirit, because we still have to fight for our freedom. Whether we like it or not, let us not be naive. You will always have people seeing the world only in terms of power, gaining power. Putin is obviously somebody whose only reasoning is in terms of gaining power. And it's a balance of power. We are not trying to be aggressive in the Western world. We just have to defend ourselves. And sometimes to defend yourself, you have to attack or counterattack. So these were my opening words. Of course, we can develop that, but I don't want to be too long. Thank you, Andre.
Thank you so much, Edouard. I'd like to turn to Tetiana for the following reason. In my other life, when I taught at the U.S. Naval War College, I would always tell my Navy captains, it's not navies or armies that go to war, it's nations and states that go to war. You, Tetiana, are now part of a nation and a state that's at war. What does that mean for you in terms of the responsibility for national defense and national security?
Merci André. Tout d'abord, je suis honorée d'être ici parmi vous, donc merci beaucoup à la famille Tocqueville et tout à l'heure Constantin Sigov pour cette invitation. On est ici dans ce panel avec des militaires. Je ne suis pas militaire, je suis civile, mais si on m'avait dit il y a 3 ans que je vais voir autant de paysages dévastés par la guerre, que je vais voir autant d'amis tomber au combat, que je vais voir des militaires aussi souvent que je les vois aujourd'hui, je n'aurais jamais cru. Je ne suis pas militaire, je suis professeur de littérature à l'Académie Mogila à Kiev, et j'ai déjà des étudiants tombés au combat, des étudiants qui étaient étudiants en lettres. Je suis membre de PEN Ukraine, organisation des écrivains, journalistes et défenseurs des droits de l'homme. Et nous avons déjà malheureusement nos collègues, ma copine, Victoria Amelena, qui était tué par un missile russe dans la ville Kramatorsk le 27 juin 2023. Donc récemment, nous avons marqué 1 an depuis sa mort. Je suis mère de 3 enfants et je connais malheureusement plusieurs familles de 3 enfants qui ont péri lors des bombardements russes. Donc je ne suis pas militaire, mais nous avons une expérience de la guerre, une expérience corporelle, une expérience tout à fait existentielle qui nous touche tout et chacun. Je ne suis pas du tout exceptionnelle. On est 40 millions, on était 40 millions avant la grande invasion. On a cette expérience dans notre chair, dans nos os et dans notre sang, malheureusement. En 2022, les chars russes se sont arrêtés à 4 km de mon appartement. J'habite à Brovary, à côté de Kiev. Et donc, dans cette région de Brovary, il y avait 27 villages qui ont été occupés et dévastés. Et nous avons visité tous ces villages, et ceci à partir d'avril 2022 en apportant de l'aide humanitaire. Depuis, on n'a jamais arrêté de voyager vers les lignes du front. Avec les missions d'Open Ukraine, mais aussi en tant que militaire, nous voyageons avec mon mari, Volodymyr Yermolenko, avec nos amis, écrivains, journalistes, vers les lignes du front, 1 à 2 fois par mois, en accomplissant des missions très différentes, mais la mission sans doute la plus importante, c'est d'apporter les voitures pour nos forces armées. Les voitures qu'on achète avec le système de crowdfunding, c'est-à-dire que donc les citoyens participent, on utilise notre autorité pour collecter de l'argent. Merci à tout le monde qui participe dans ces collectes, comme Constantin Sigov, qui est contributeur très fréquent de cela. Donc, donc nous voyons les militaires et nous partageons, nous avons cette expérience-là. Je ne suis pas militaire et aucun Ukrainien ne voulait pas être soldat dans cette guerre, puisque c'est une guerre que l'Ukraine n'a jamais voulu. Il est important de savoir que l'Ukraine n'a jamais voulu cette guerre. L'Ukraine, comme vous le savez, avait rendu son arsenal nucléaire en 1994. L'Ukraine avait même conclu quelques compromis très difficiles pour avoir la flotte russe en Crimée dans les années 2000. Après que la Russie avait saisi d'une manière illégale la Crimée et avait commencé les combats à l'est de l'Ukraine, dans le Donbass, nous avons joué cette carte diplomatique pour encore 8 ans dans le format qui s'appelait à l'époque format Normandie, vous connaissez sans doute, avec France et Allemagne comme intermédiaires. Nous avons même, les Ukrainiens, nous avons même élu un candidat qui est devenu président, Volodymyr Zelensky, qui proposait en 2019 de regarder Poutine dans les yeux et puis d'arrêter de tirer. Pour lui, c'était une manière de terminer la guerre. C'est-à-dire que c'est une guerre qu'on n'a jamais voulu, mais qui est quand même venue. Et donc, tout ça n'a pas marché. Et la leçon qu'on peut en tirer, la leçon qui est très importante, c'est qu'on ne peut pas éviter la guerre, on ne peut pas se dire qu'on ne doit pas provoquer l'agresseur, sinon il attaque. L'agresseur n'attaque pas parce qu'il est provoqué, l'agresseur attaque parce qu'il n'était pas stoppé. La Tchétchénie dans les années 90, la Moldavie dans les années 90, la Géorgie 2008, Crimée 2014, Syrie à partir de 2015, la Russie ne s'arrêtera jamais avant d'être arrêtée. L'Empire, comme vous le savez très bien, elle a un centre, elle n'a jamais de frontières. Et donc, après l'Ukraine, vous savez bien, la Pologne est tout à côté, et les frontières des pays qui appartiennent à l'OTAN sont tout à fait à côté. Nous avons déjà vu les missiles russes aller jusqu'à la Pologne, les débris en tout cas, et nous avons déjà vu des drones russes, iraniens, aller jusqu'à Roumanie. C'est-à-dire que, il y a dans cette guerre, il y a toujours, donc on ne peut pas l'éviter, on ne peut pas se dire que le pacifisme, l'anchilisme, je ne sais pas, la volonté d'éviter la guerre, ça aide à arrêter la guerre. Tel est justement, donc on devient le soldat dans ces guerres, qu'on le veuille ou pas. Dans une guerre d'une telle échelle, il n'existe pas de la division entre l'armée et la société, malheureusement. L'Ukraine avait préparé entre 2014 et 2022 une armée professionnelle. La Russie aussi. Aujourd'hui, cette armée qui était active en 2022, l'armée ukrainienne, elle n'existe presque plus. C'est-à-dire le niveau de perte, pas uniquement de morts, mais aussi des blessés, est tellement fort, tellement élevé, que nos amis témoignent que cette armée professionnelle n'y est plus, 2 ans plus tard. La même chose pour l'armée russe. Donc cette armée professionnelle russe qui était là, qui était à envahir l'Ukraine en février-mars 2022, il n'y est plus. Aujourd'hui, ce sont des armées, 2 armées de civils, 2 anciens civils, de civils d'hier qui font les combats. C'est-à-dire que dans une guerre de telle échelle, on ne peut pas dire que moi je suis civil, laissons la guerre aux professionnels. Ça n'existe pas. Quand une guerre arrive, ça va impliquer tôt ou tard toute la société, qu'on le veuille ou pas. Si on ne veut pas combattre, on sera de l'autre côté, la guerre va frapper à la porte, parce que on sait très bien que les Russes, ils mobilisent d'une manière absolument exhaustive dans les territoires qu'ils ont occupés. On le veuille ou pas, les hommes du territoire de Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk et Lugansk, ils combattent contre les Ukrainiens. C'est-à-dire on doit être soldat qu'on le veuille ou pas. Une autre leçon que nous avons appris, et ça touche cette question brûlante de la démocratie qui était abordée, on parle des citoyens soldats, nous avons appris que si nous avons tenu l'Ukraine, c'est parce que on a sacrifié l'individualisme. C'est-à-dire que si on survit dans la guerre, c'est grâce à la force de la communauté. Dans le terme même de citoyen en ukrainien, romadianin, il y a romada, il y a la communauté. On ne peut pas survivre tout seul, on dépend des autres. C'est toujours, comme a dit le maire Klitschko, donc les doigts dans le poing. On peut survivre, si on survit grâce à un effort collectif. Donc l'individualisme outré n'aide pas dans la guerre. Une autre chose qu'on a appris pendant cette guerre, c'est qu'être citoyen, ce n'est pas seulement de savoir où sont mes droits et où sont mes devoirs, mais c'est de savoir que pendant des épreuves comme la guerre, on est obligé, on doit donner plus par rapport à ce qu'on reçoit. Comme on dit souvent en Ukraine, ne demandez pas ce que l'Ukraine peut vous donner, demandez ce que vous pouvez faire pour l'Ukraine. C'est en quelque sorte cet sureffort qu'on fait tous les jours, je parle de l'armée, mais je parle aussi de civils, qu'on arrive à survivre. Donc bien sûr, il y a les raisons historiques à cela. Il n'y a pas, en Ukraine, on n'avait pas d'État-providence. L'État, c'est jamais père, c'est jamais une figure paternelle, c'est plutôt un enfant, comme dit Volodymyr Yermolenko, mon philosophe et mon mari. Il aime cette thèse que l'Ukraine, pour notre génération, c'est notre bébé, c'est notre enfant. Parce que c'est un État en quelque sorte jeune, c'est notre enfant, c'est pas notre père. On n'attend rien de l'État, mais on fait tout le possible pour qu'il survive. Donc il y a bien sûr les raisons historiques à cela, de l'effondrement de l'Union soviétique, etc. On est terminé. La dernière chose que je dirais pour cette introduction-là, c'est que malheureusement, par chantage et par le jeu psychologique, la Russie est malheureusement en train de gagner cette guerre psychologique contre l'Occident. Elle est en train de gagner parce qu'on entend trop souvent de thèses telles que la Russie ne peut pas perdre cette guerre, personne ne peut gagner cette guerre, qu'est-ce qu'on doit faire, il faut négocier, etc. etc. L'Occident, malheureusement, on est en train de perdre cette guerre psychologiquement parce qu'on évoque trop souvent cette angoisse d'être nommé les co-belligérants, etc. Il n'y a pas de raison de céder avant de mener le combat. Quand vous regardez les opinions publiques, les sondages en Ukraine, dans un pays où l'électricité aujourd'hui, c'est 12 heures sur 24, avec j'oserais dire, des centaines de milliers d'hommes et femmes tombés au combat et des populations qui sont dans l'état très difficile, la majorité écrasante des Ukrainiens va vous dire, ils sont convaincus aujourd'hui, qu'on est absolument capable de gagner cette guerre. On ne voit pas pourquoi ce climat de céder le combat, de perdre, de chercher, de ce défaitisme, il est autant répandu. Il n'y a aucune raison de renoncer à ce combat avant de le commencer. Dans le sens que le monde démocratique, avec ses ressources économiques, avec les technologies qui sont à disposition, avec l'intelligence qui est là, elle a toutes les chances d'arriver à cette défaite militaire russe qui est absolument nécessaire pour la paix juste et la paix durable de notre continent. Sans la défaite russe, avec un certain compromis, ça sera justement une autre guerre à venir un peu plus tard. Tout compromis, comme c'était en Géorgie en 2008, comme c'était avec Crimée en 2014, dans d'autres cas aussi, ça sera une guerre encore plus grande plus tard. Donc, voilà, réveillez-vous, comme le thème de notre conférence suggère, citoyen, réveillez-vous, le danger d'écroulement du monde européen démocratique est là. Il faut avoir le courage de rester debout devant le défi existentiel que menace non seulement l'Ukraine, mais tout le monde démocratique et européen.
Thank you, Tetiana. And let me now turn to Alexandre, if I may, and ask you to comment on your experience from your national perspective. As Edouard said, most of the Western nations have moved away from the kind of universal military service, have moved towards professional armies. I think to a large extent it was a result of a sense of security after the Cold War that began to develop and the perception that those forces were not necessary. Switzerland is different. Could you speak about the tradition and how that informs your thinking about the citizen soldier and the military service in general?
I'm very happy to do this. I don't know if you would prefer me to address your audience in English or in French, but definitely I can point to a certain number of elements and words that have been pronounced and that speak very closely to Switzerland's history and Switzerland's identity. And the first is freedom, which was commented just moments ago. If you go back far enough in history, the reason why Swiss citizens became citizen soldiers is that they became free from the Habsburg family. They essentially were living on the grounds owned by the Habsburg family. We're talking about the 13th century. This is quite some time ago. And because they were freed, they were allowed to bear arms. And this was kind of a sociological experiment in medieval times. And because of this, we have this extreme awareness and consciousness that being a citizen requires some effort. Whatever the effort is, it can be paying taxes. It's easier if you remind people that there are not only rights, there are also obligations, and paying taxes, serving in the military and civil security are some of the examples. So I think there's something that is extremely significant with the origins of Swiss society and the origins of the country. Now, of course, I don't want to sound idealistic, and we have to understand that there is a little bit of a myth around this concept of a citizen soldier, because the word conscription is much, much more recent than the origins that I just mentioned, and we're talking here about the late 19th century. Mandatory military service in Switzerland was only introduced in 1911. So you see that definitely the conscription, the military service that we are talking about today within a state-organized, state-sponsored national armed forces. This is something that is extremely different from a time when everybody not only had to do a certain number of days of military service, but I forgot to tell you that until the 20th century, most military personnel, had to pay for their own weapons. So you understand that, of course, we have traveled sometime since. Since we are talking about history, we have to talk about the period of the two world wars. Switzerland definitely is presented at times as having undergone this sort of miracle in which it was neither invaded during the First or the Second World War. And let me just tell you a very short story. Just as World War I was about to start, a few months before the start of World War I, there were already tensions. We have perhaps forgotten this, but there were already wars going on, in particular in the Balkans. I was in Kosovo just yesterday. So these were anxious times in 1910, 1911. And so before the beginning of the war, the Swiss Armed Forces organized huge demonstrations and field maneuvers, invited the Kaiser, so the German emperor, who came and witnessed these maneuvers. The entire Swiss Armed Forces at the time was put on display to impress, and we would say today, to deter Germany from ever attempting to cross a border or misread a traffic sign. At the end of these maneuvers, Kaiser Wilhelm went and had the opportunity to speak with some of the soldiers who, of course, a few days before had been working in their farms, had been administering this or that company. And Wilhelm, the German emperor, asked some of these soldiers, well, you have a very impressive military. The military is about 200,000 strong, but what would you do if Germany invaded Switzerland with, say, 400,000 soldiers? And the story goes, this lone soldier simply answered, well, I will shoot twice and then I'll go home. This is something that one still has as a mentality, even without telling this particular story, but it's something that is quite significant in Switzerland. And so differentiate or separating or canceling the conscription that we have and the militia system, as we call it today, is very, very complicated because it has very, very deep roots. Don't want to bore you with all sorts of stories, but I think I can conclude with just a few very simple numbers that will show how deep and how significant this issue of military service is in Switzerland. In 2013, so this is not very, very long ago, this is not ancient times, this is not the Middle Ages, this is 2013, there was a vote in Switzerland, do you want to keep mandatory military service? As we do in Switzerland, we ask questions about everything, and eventually the population votes. So on the 18th of May 2013, 76% of the population, this was far beyond and above what anybody had anticipated, 76% of the population said, yes, we want to maintain military service. And of course, that doesn't threaten civil service if you don't want to perform your duties, your military service with a weapon. There are ways that you can do this without carrying a gun or a weapon, but it just goes to show how significant and how important this is. Let me just give you another census. This is a census, not a vote. This is a 2005 poll. How much of the population, how much of the youth would be prepared to die for their country? This is something that comes regularly. And in Switzerland, 39% of the population said yes, they would give their life for their country. I don't want to make all sorts of fancy comparisons, but you understand that you do have a few countries that are beyond 80%, and they tend to be dictatorships. Switzerland is kind of in between, and you have a country like France, which is in the 20 to 30% range. So all of this to say, it is quite significant. I think it is important to reflect, as was mentioned before, on the rights, the human rights, the fundamental rights, but also the obligations which exist in the UN Charter, not only focus on the rights, also on the obligations. And let me just say one last item. Yes, there has been a parenthesis, there has been a historical bracket of dividends of peace. But of course, we have now been caught up by the realities of armed conflict worldwide. 57 countries are now at war in one shape or form or another. And very quickly, you see that these issues of reintroducing conscription and military service is becoming once again an issue, because there is no way to replace mass quantity other than by conscription and military service. Volunteer military service, I can give you the number in Switzerland, in Germany, and some other countries, but it's fairly consistent. It's 0.2% of the population. So we cannot just rely on voluntary service. We need to give it a little extra push. We need to stress these obligations, these institutions, and this is why we have the system that we have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandre. Could I follow up with you quickly and then turn to my other two panelists? So there's another country, relatively small, Finland, about 5.5 million. Everybody serves from the age of 16 to 60. Their specialty is adjust as they enter new professions. Public trust in government institutions in Finland is off the chart. The determination to defend the country, also if you ask a question, how many would fight even in a desperate fight? And a lot of it has to do with Finnish history and its relationship with Russia over the decades. But my question to you is, have we forfeited, in your view, something at the societal level when during the last 30 years, most of Western societies moved to all volunteer force? And the numbers you quote, in the case of the US, 0.5% of American society has fought all the wars that we have fought over the last 30 years. And the involvement was predominantly their family, friends, and of course themselves who served. The society supported it, but was not engaged in any sort of meaningful, strong, immediate fashion. It was patriotic, it expressed their support. Are we not losing something if we move away from the sense that if the balloon goes up, everybody's got skin in the game, as we like to say?
Let me answer you briefly in two ways. First of all, we know this for a fact. The capacities that we had and that we lose, we will lose forever. Or perhaps in some ways we will spend tenfold in order to recreate these capacities that we have abandoned. We can talk about nuclear weapons for some countries that have played with the idea of abandoning certain capacities. So it's very easy to go down. Going back up is a huge financial, political burden. I wrote quite a few articles comparing Sweden and Finland. Since you gave the example of Finland, let me say that in 3 years, Sweden has destroyed its conscription system. Destroyed. Has gone from 82 maneuver battalions to 7. So you can tell me that these 7 professionally equipped, excellently equipped battalions are far better unit per unit with regards to the previous force. But of course, the military capabilities have nothing to do. I have calculated, and this is in a free article that can be downloaded on the Revue militaire Suisse website, but I've calculated that in order to recreate even a third of this capacity that was lost in just 3 years, it's going to take about 10 years. So this is the kind of cost that we are contemplating when we're talking about recreating capacities that have been abandoned. And just to finish off, this comparison between Sweden and Finland is an excellent one. Finland joined NATO in 1 year and 1 day. The process of joining NATO was only 1 year and 1 day. Sweden, it was a lot more complicated. Well, let me say it's not about this or that caricature and this and that political issue. It has a lot to do with the fact that Finland has as much military hardware and as much military personnel as all of these Scandinavian countries united. So Finland is actually a plus, if you want. It's an added value in terms of security. Sweden does have arms industry, does have interesting capacities, but on the other hand, it is a security, it demands security, and therefore I think that you're not looking towards cooperation in the same way if you're talking about a country that can provide security, or if you are asking, or if you're looking at joining of a country that is demanding security.
Yeah, thank you. In fairness to Sweden, the delays in their case was not solely the capability issues. It was also a lot of politics around it, but we're not going to be revisiting this. Edward, let me come back to you, if I may. You mentioned that the different models, conscription or national service versus all professional, varies by countries. Could you elaborate on that? And the second question I'd like to ask you, when you look at the realities of the war in Ukraine today, and one thing we've learned, Alexandre spoke about this as well, mass matters. Even the most exquisite capability cannot supplement completely. It can help, but will not offset the ability to produce at scale and speed when it comes to munitions and weapons, to raise numbers that we may need. The most exquisite airplane will malfunction, or it will be hit, or something will go wrong. The most exquisite missile, if it's not available in large enough numbers, will be overwhelmed by mass if the numbers are such. So are we victims of the last 3 decades of misdiagnosing what warfare will look like, what the realities of international politics are like? Have we really bought into this notion of the end of history and the peace dividend, and especially after 9/11 and the global war on terror, as we called it unfortunately in the US, we reformatted our military forces in a way that made them deployable, out-of-area operations, just-in-time logistics, so efficiency at any price. And in the process, we lost the human element and the civic element in the military profession.
Thank you, Andrew. If I may, I will begin to answer to your second question. What the Ukraine war has taught us is that mass matters, which obviously is something the Western world had globally forgotten. We were in what I would call a high-end technological war, meaning that each equipment would cost more and more, so you would have less and less, most unfortunately. This is very interesting, and it's very useful for small-size war or for expeditionary forces. And for the past 3 decades, as you mentioned, what the Western world has been doing, at least for countries ready to send expeditionary forces such as the United States, UK, or France, yes, we needed really professional armies just for that. I remember back in 1989 and 1990, the first Iraqi war. That was the end of the national conscription in France when then President Mitterrand decided that no conscript, no draftee would ever go to combat. He wasn't speaking of a war, because a war is something which has a legal meaning. You have to go to the parliament, you have to do lots of things. And he said, I will send only professional regiments. That was possible in the army. That was totally impossible in the Navy, because on all the French Navy ships, you had 35% of draftees. So the first thing we had to do is disembark our 35% draftee, fly professional sailors coming from other ships, which were dismantled, other crews were dismantled, to complement our crew. I was on an aircraft carrier at the time, and we received 800 new sailors coming from destroyers, minesweepers, whatever. And we had to teach them the ship. An aircraft carrier is not a minesweeper. Everybody can understand that. And just because of that, we lost several weeks. That was the end of the national service in France. And this has to do with French history and the Algerian War, when many politicians were accused of mistreating the draftees by sending them to combat in Algeria. That was the end of it. On the other hand, at the time, the only thing we were doing, the only wars we were fighting were small wars. The Iraqi war was a small war. The global war on terrorism was a small war, whether we like it or not. So it was obviously useless to have draftees, conscripts. And it was much more important to have highly sophisticated weapons and means of understanding the situation. But everybody had forgotten the possibility of a full-fledged war, as Putin has begun one back, we know it now, in 2014 in Ukraine. And now mass matters. So now I answer to your second question, your first question, sorry. When mass matters, you have only two options. Either you have a national service, a conscription, a draft system. Once again, it depends on the way you see the threats on your own country and your global position of the strategic picture. And second is, how much? Because if it's only to have uniformed civilians, it's useless. You need people ready to fight, and this is another story. So another option, I don't say one is better than the other, I say you have two options, is to have reserves, which is something which is quite correctly done in the United States, mainly through the National Guard system, but which doesn't really exist to the same extent in Europe, and which doesn't exist really in France, even if our politicians, including some former prime ministers, say we will increase our reserves. I've heard that for at least 40 years. But when you don't pay the reserves, when you do not equip them, how do you recruit them? So by the end of the day, most unfortunately, it's a financial conundrum. You just do not know how to do it. What does it mean? It means that it is to our politicians to make their own mind. Now, I will give you some figures. If we want to have, in France, the return of a national military service, it means that we will have 800,000 new draftees every year for 1 year military service. 800,000 a year. Just imagine the cost, knowing that we don't even know where they would sleep, eat. I mean, we have sold everything. So it's really a problem, and it's a matter of political choice. So please, ask our politicians.
Okay. That I will turn to our French friends before we allow for questions, but I have one more for Tetiana, because in light of what Edward has said, our countries, including my own, The US defense spending right now stands at 3.1%. If we factor inflation into it, we're at about 2.7% when it comes to the cost of weapons and ever more sophisticated platforms, as General Cavoli spoke about it. Our authorized joint force is 1.3 million. Now, that's for the country the size of the United States, and with shortfalls in recruitment that we all have, it's probably under that. The Army was short 45,000 this year, this cycle. The Navy, 23,000. So put that against our adversaries. The Russians are targeting a 1.5 million army, military. The Chinese are over 2 million. You have the same problem that you have in Europe with professional militaries. Compare that to Ukraine. The entire nation is mobilized. I would submit to you that the difference here might be when you say ask the politicians to pay for that, it's the unwillingness, unlike in Ukraine, because they're fighting for their survival, to recognize at the level of leadership, of our political leadership, how the world has changed. We're still living in this disarmed, zero-risk environment in the world. The war is out there. It doesn't really touch us. Yes, we're in great solidarity with the Ukrainians. She's living in a different world. Is there any doubt in your mind that that commitment, even though you spoke of the first army that got attrited to a large extent, but now the draft has been lowered to 25. Ukrainians have taken very heavy losses, but the threat perception and the leadership, you heard a very powerful testimony from Mr. Klitschko. That is determination to fight. That is leadership telling people where we are on our side of the border, so to speak. We don't hear that, Eduard. Am I right that the Ukrainians will persevere because they are united in that threat perception?
Once again, I'll respond in French, it'll be quicker. Difficile de dire pour les chiffres, mais l'Ukraine a fait face à un ennemi qui est 4 fois supérieur en termes de population. La population de l'Ukraine avant la grande invasion, c'était grosso modo 40 millions. Les Russes sont 140 millions. Voilà, grosso modo. C'est-à-dire, avec toute aide que nous recevons et pour lesquelles nous sommes vraiment infiniment reconnaissants à nos partenaires européens et américains, ça c'est toujours et ça sera toujours un Ukrainien contre 4 Russes. Et il y a ce phénomène de l'épuisement, c'est-à-dire que même dans le combat existentiel, parce que nous n'avons tout simplement, pourquoi nous combattons? Parce que tout simplement, nous n'avons pas de plan B. C'est-à-dire, nous ne pouvons pas tous venir en Europe, n'est-ce pas? Donc il y a déjà des millions d'Ukrainiens qui se sont réfugiés en Europe. Encore une fois, on remercie les peuples de l'Europe qui nous ont accueillis. Mais si on déménage tous, vous allez vous poser les questions, qu'est-ce que va devenir avec les votes qui sont déjà compliqués en Europe? Donc pas qu'en France, mais ailleurs. C'est-à-dire qu'on ne peut pas déménager en Europe. Il y a quelqu'un qui doit rester, c'est-à-dire rester pour combattre. Mais le problème, c'est que même avec les armements qui arrivent, avec les retards qu'on constate, il y a ce phénomène de l'épuisement. C'est-à-dire que, on n'est pas éternel. Le fait de perdre le temps nous fait perdre cette guerre. C'est-à-dire que si on avait des chars Léopard durant l'été 2022, ils seraient vraiment utiles. Lors de la contre-offensive de 2023, ils étaient beaucoup moins utiles. Pourquoi? Parce que les Russes ont bâti les lignes de défense, ils ont largement miné toute cette région-là des Zaporijia. Nous avons visité avec des amis cette région, nous avons recueilli les témoignages des soldats qui, eux, ont participé dans cette opération-là. Aujourd'hui, nous attendons toujours les avions de F-16. On espère qu'ils seront utiles, mais my guess, ils seront quand même un peu moins utiles aujourd'hui que durant l'été 2023. C'est-à-dire, il y a cette question de temps et cette question de la concentration de l'effort. Si on fait cette ce conflit durait dans le temps, ça nous fait perdre de ressources sans qu'on arrive à un résultat voulu. C'est-à-dire que, voilà, il y a toujours les chars qui sont partis, il y a toujours du matériel très cher qui est parti, or que les lignes du front n'ont pas bougé, or que la contre-offensive de l'été 2023 n'a pas bougé la ligne du front. Et depuis voilà, ce moment-là, il y a des petits avancées et retours avec voilà, les Russes qui progressent petit à petit, quelques centaines de mètres, quelques kilomètres, et c'est tout. C'est-à-dire qu'il y a la nécessité de la concentration de l'effort politique, je dirais qu'il est quand même plutôt politique pour l'instant que militaire, que de se dire que nous avons besoin d'une stratégie, d'une vision stratégique. Qu'est-ce que nous voulons obtenir dans ce front ukrainien? Donc c'est une question très simple. Les réponses du type que nous allons soutenir l'Ukraine aussi longtemps qu'il faudra, c'est une réponse qui invite cette guerre à durer, qui consomme les ressources européennes, les ressources américaines, qui entraîne des risques politiques en Europe et bien sûr qui coûte. D'ailleurs, pour nous, les Ukrainiens, ça nous coûte des vies humaines tous les jours. Et ce sont des vies humaines qui ne sont pas remplaçables. Comme vous comprenez, quand il y a vos amis qui tombent au combat, quand il y a vos étudiants qui disparaissent, ce n'est pas remplaçable. On ne considère pas en termes de ressources. C'est-à-dire que, voilà, il y a quelque chose que nous avons parlé de cette lucidité aujourd'hui. Donc, il faudrait une vision stratégique. Qu'est-ce que nous voulons avoir? Pour l'Ukraine, la réponse ukrainienne est très simple. On devrait. La réponse est simple, mais bien sûr, la réalisation est très compliquée. Elle nécessite un effort. Il faudrait repousser les troupes russes du territoire ukrainien. Grande question. Est-ce que la guerre s'arrête là? Et non. Pourquoi? Vous savez que les Russes ont inclus les 4 régions de l'Ukraine. La région de Donetsk, la région de Lugansk, la région de Kherson et la région de Zaporizhia dans leur constitution, même les parties de ces régions-là qui ne contrôlent pas. Grande question, est-ce qu'ils peuvent accepter le fait qu'on repousse, même si on arrive à repousser les territoires, qu'on libère la Crimée? Et non, parce que pour eux, ça voudra dire, selon leur constitution, qu'il y a cette attaque contre la Russie. Quoi faire? Donc la vision stratégique, il faudrait, à part cela, procéder au démontage de ce système russe et de cet État en tant que tel, de cet empire. Et la tâche qui peut bien sûr paraître très compliquée, mais sans cela, sans poser les questions comment est-ce qu'on va procéder au démontage de ce système politique impérial de la Russie, on n'arrivera pas à avoir la paix durable, la paix juste et la paix durable sur le continent européen. Et donc, tant qu'il n'y a pas de paix durable sur le continent européen, les questions qu'on discute aujourd'hui, ils resteront ici. Donc, nous sommes dans le besoin urgent de la vision stratégique. Qu'est-ce qu'on doit faire avec ce défi existentiel pour toute l'Europe qui est la Russie?
Thank you, Tetiana, and I'm very glad that you actually raised this issue, because there's a cliche in American English: if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So the notion of understanding what victory means, what the strategy is, not just how long in temporal sense we will be supporting Ukraine, but what is the end objective that we can get to. And I think one of the reasons that we have this disconnect is because I would submit to you, we still in the West live largely in this zero-risk environment. We're still in disbelief that the world has changed so dramatically, whereas in your country, you feel it every day, you see it every day, and you know that the world has changed. Let me open it to questions now. Please identify yourself and tell me who you want to direct your question to. Let me start here, and then I will be going forward. I believe we still have about 30 minutes to do so. We need a microphone here, please. Could we please get a microphone for the lady in the front row? Okay. Do we have, can we get that one over there then? Yeah. Thank you. Merci, monsieur.
Thank you so much. My name is Yair Golan. I'm an Irish student at the College of Europe, and I'm just very thankful for everyone today for their great interventions. My question is a little bit more angled towards Colonel Vautravers. I just wondered if you had any comments in relation to, in terms of like the geopolitical situation, neutral countries have really been critiqued for maintaining their policies of neutrality in these times, and obviously since the invasion and the war in Ukraine. So I wondered if you have any comments for how neutrality is continued to be perceived in Europe. Thank you.
I guess what she's saying, when are you joining NATO? No, just kidding.
Well, you know that Switzerland has a very long history of neutrality. You can trace this neutrality back to the 16th century. Some other countries have a history of neutrality which dates back to the 1950s only. So it's not exactly the same kind of neutrality and not exactly the same kind of history. You said that you were a student from Ireland, and definitely there has been a lot of historical research and criticism with regards to some of the attitudes and stances of Ireland during World War II, for example, and even World War I, without going into the polemic. I think that neutrality is not always extremely well understood, and what is really needed is a bit of pedagogic. With regards to Switzerland, because that was your question right now, I think that what a lot of people feel neutrality is in Switzerland is really a policy of non-alignment, and we should, as I said before, we should put together a little more explanation with regards to what it means to be neutral today. With regards to Ukraine, because this was perhaps an implied question of yours, let me just say that I was responsible for the hospital and finding accommodations for 8,500 people from Ukraine in the last few years before changing jobs, and we have received over 85,000 people from Ukraine. We've also been extremely active, not only with regards to humanitarian assistance, but also are looking forward towards negotiations. Peace, of course, is an end goal, so I think that everything that can be done within the confines of neutrality is being done.
Thank you very much, Alexandre. Next question here, please. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Jan Pabisiak. I represent College of Europe. Thank you very much for all your contributions. General Cavoli today said that to be a soldier is a height of citizenship, but what is glorious during the time of war can be very problematic after the war, and that was the situation with the birth of Nazi Germany and birth of Bolshevik Russia. And I would like to ask, what is the possible remedy for the question of radicalization of soldiers returning from the front line because of their experiences with warfare and because of their lack of psychological help, for example, and other problems of being neglected by the society and being seen as a burden with PTSD and other symptoms? What is the possible solution for Ukraine not to turn into a very radicalized and divided state? Thank you very much.
Who are you directing the question to, Admiral?
It's a general question to the panelists.
I probably have an answer for you. It happens to be that we in the Western world have a good idea on how to do it, because basically and mainly UK and France have been doing exactly this type of system, setting up a system. I will describe it later. In Africa. And it's called the DDR program, for demobilization, disarmament, and reintegration. As you know, you have private armies or militias or far too numerous armies for peacetime, and what to do with those people, how to reinsert them in normal life. I do admit that a soldier's life is not a normal life. It has to be kept as an exception. And you must have some professional soldiers just in case you have to have a draft or use reservists. But yes, those type of systems do exist. Probably more than a dozen of them have been set up in the past 15 to 20 years in Africa, with, globally speaking, a 2-to-1 success ratio, which is quite good. Sometimes it doesn't work because hatred between ethnies or between political factions is far too deep-rooted to be able to have a good performance in, let's say, 5 to 10 years. But generally speaking, it does work. So we know globally how to do it, meaning that if we do apply the same type of so-called recipes to peacetime Ukraine and peacetime Russia, it should work, and we'll have to do it.
Even with such a big part of Ukrainian nation being now forced to flee the country because of the war, because I also see this as a problem that a major part of Ukrainian society was forced to abandon the country and probably will not come back. So
this has to be a Ukrainian answer.
There you go.
I'll fix the numbers for it's not the majority of Ukrainians who fled the country. So we used to have 40 million people before the full-scale invasion. The figures vary from 4 to 8 million of Ukrainians, mostly women with kids who fled the country. So it's from 10 to 20%. Speaking about rehabilitation of veterans and what would happen after the war, we have small experience, small-scale experience, because the war in Ukraine started in 2014. So, and we still had a lot of veterans who combated in the Donbass and who were back to their cities in 2014, 2015, 2016. We have a lot of NGOs who are active in the field and who are doing what we call rehabilitation for veterans, but it was for sure on a small scale, because at that moment our armed forces was about 250,000 people. Today, as of today, it's 1 million. So, and dead and wounded, so it could be 2 or 3 million until the end, the war will be over. So I'm pretty sure these Ukrainian initiatives will be or are already in contact with our European counterparts just to exchange this experience, because the trauma after the war, this is not only the soldier thing, it's also family thing, because in every family a man is combating in the field, so he has a wife, kids, and all of them are also not in this context of normality, especially because there is no rotations, almost no rotations. So this is not like you combat for 2 months and then you have your vacation for 2 months. So there is unfortunately no possibility for a lot of people, for a lot of soldiers to be back. So it will be a huge, really huge problem after the war. And we're already thinking how to treat it. But the task number one for us is for sure, it's to win this war. To treat all these subjects, which will be huge, we have, first of all, to win this war, because otherwise it will be eternal war on our territory until the last Ukrainian. And neither us, neither our kids, our children will have no future. So there's priority of tasks: win the war and then treat veterans, treat the whole society, which is largely traumatized. Only 2.5 years after the full-scale invasion, and we still have this war going on.
Could I address this just 1 second? As I said at the very beginning, it's not the military that goes to war. It's the nation and the state that goes to war. And it depends on what kind of a state it is. You gave the example of radicalization of Weimar Germany that gave them Hitler. You know, what you see right now in Russia is really the end of the Russian Weimar of the 1990s that gave them Putin. About 16 million served in the US military in World War II. okay? Just that capacity alone meant that what Tetiana is describing, that we could rotate men. I spoke recently to a senior flag officer retired in the United States, 4-star general, who said, no matter how well you're trained, somewhere between 40 and 400 firefights, if you're not relieved, every soldier will break. It's just the amount of stress you're dealing with. So the American democracy went to war in the Second World War, mobilized a mass army with more than adequate reserves. Those men came back, they built the American economic miracle of the 1950s. We didn't have any Hitlers or any, and a lot of those men were PTSD'd, and we did our best to assist them, as the Admiral was talking about. So it's not just the military component, it's the whole of society component. My money is on democracies. Mobilized democracies are unbeatable in my view. We'll take on any authoritarian and we'll prevail. But the question is exactly that. You know, are we mobilized around the common leadership purpose? Yes, sir, Constantine, and then we'll come there.
Immense merci. Vous parlez des choses, des réalités de la vie humaine qui sont les plus précieuses et littéralement inestimables. Les médias parlent beaucoup plus des aspects opposés, de la suspicion, de la méfiance, mais le moment est venu d'entendre parler du travail du Pen Club Ukraine en particulier, qui sauve les vies et remet la confiance au centre de notre expérience. À l'instar des initiatives de Timothy Snyder, bien connu, ici en Europe, en France, il existe également un désir croissant de mener des actions concrètes pour aider et protéger les citoyens ukrainiens. Le désir de faire partie d'une expérience inestimable de solidarité par le biais du don. Je ne sais pas quelle aide matérielle les citoyens actifs ici présents peuvent envoyer, par exemple pour acheter une ambulance, mais deux questions. Premièrement, quelle histoire de l'aide que vous avez apportée pouvez-vous partager avec nous, Tetiana? Et deuxièmement, quels dons de ceux qui soutiennent vos activités ont enrichi votre expérience et votre regard sur les gens?
C'est excellent. Moi, je répondrai d'une manière très brève. Alors, il y a une chose absolument incroyable que nous faisons dans le Pen Ukraine, c'est que nous apportons, figurez-vous, des livres dans les bibliothèques qui se trouvent de 10 à 20 km de la ligne du front. Vous allez nous dire que c'est absurde, que ce n'est pas possible, parce qu'à de 10 à 20 km de la ligne du front, les gens ils souffrent de bombardements. Ça c'est vrai, de artillerie, etc. Dans la ville, prenons la ville de Kherson. La ville de Kherson, vous avez sans doute vu dans les actualités, c'est une ville qui était occupée par les Russes, libérée, elle était sous le feu, après elle était inondée, etc., etc. Toutes les bibliothèques de la ville de Kherson sont soit très gravement endommagées, soit détruites. Même la bibliothèque d'Odessa-Wenchar, cet grand immeuble qui surplombe le fleuve du Dnipro. Qu'est-ce que font les habitants de Kherson dans cette condition-là? Alors bien, ils ouvrent les abris. Il y a des abris anti-bombes, des souterrains. Ils ouvrent dans les abris des étagères qu'on appelle à l'américaine les book crossing, les points de book crossing. Ils nous appellent à Pen Ukraine en disant qu'est-ce que vous pouvez nous apporter des livres parce que les gens ils ont besoin de lire parce qu'il n'y a pas d'électricité, il n'y a pas de téléphone portable, parce qu'on ne peut pas se distraire, à lire comme un abri. Ils sont 3 jeunes de 23 à 24 ans qui s'occupent de cela. Ils ouvrent des points de book crossing dans toute la ville, donc il s'agit de dizaines d'abris comme ça, dont des abris dans ce qu'on appelle Ostiv. Ostiv, c'est une île, c'est vraiment 2-3 km de position russe. Ceux parmi vous qui sont militaires savent que 2-3 km de position russe, c'est artillerie. C'est-à-dire que c'est vraiment donc, tout près. Voilà, et nous apportons cette aide-là. Donc c'est une aide qui n'est pas matérielle. Vous allez nous dire que ça n'aide pas à gagner des guerres. Mais justement, si. Parce que les questions dans les guerres, il y a souvent la question de la morale, de la résistance. Et c'est vraiment existentiel pour des gens de rester eux-mêmes, de rester fidèles à ceux qui sont, et puis de pouvoir lire. Et c'est bien sûr les livres en ukrainien qui sont sollicités. Nous faisons ça dans toute la ligne du front qui va du nord jusqu'au sud. Et bien sûr, nous apportons des voitures pour l'armée. C'est un autre dossier. Et ça marche comme ça. Donc, j'explique rapidement. 1 minute. L'État ukrainien ne peut pas fournir un matériel usagé à l'armée. Pourquoi ? Parce qu'il y a la question de marché public. Ce que peuvent faire les citoyens, et nous on n'est pas exceptionnels, il y a énormément de citoyens comme nous qui le faisons, c'est d'acheter des vieilles voitures usagées du type 4x4, ils sont très demandés dans l'armée, quelque part d'aller marcher en Europe, les amener en Ukraine, les réparer et les amener dans les fronts. Dans la ligne du front, une telle voiture qui coûte, à nous, elle coûte 5, 6, 7 000 euros, ça devient plus cher avec le temps. Elle peut vivre 1 semaine, elle peut vivre un an, ça dépend. Parfois, ça vit quelques jours seulement parce qu'ils sont souvent usagés. Et donc, ce que nous faisons les collectes de fonds auprès des citoyens ukrainiens. C'est comme si on avait payé les taxes 2 fois ou 3 fois. D'abord, on paye les taxes, après, on contribue, ça s'appelle les donates, aussi à l'américaine. Donc, il y a énormément de gens qui font cela. Et il n'y a rien de plus précieux dans cette expérience de guerre que les soldats qui écrivent que cette voiture-ci, elle a sauvé des vies. Parce que dans cette voiture-ci, nous avons évacué 1 blessé, 2 blessés, 3 blessés. S'ils n'étaient pas évacués, vous pouvez comprendre, donc ça serait des morts. C'est-à-dire que c'est très, très nécessité. La dernière chose, si vous voulez, vous pouvez toujours nous soutenir. Actuellement, il y a une demande qui nous est parvenue de soldats français. Il s'appelle Jonathan Delporte. On a fait connaissance à Tchernobyevka, à côté de Kherson. Ça fait 2 ans et demi, presque, il est venu en mars 2022, qu'il défend l'Ukraine dans l'infanterie et dans le renseignement. Il était blessé, il était sur la rive gauche de Kherson. Vous pouvez écouter son témoignage dans notre podcast « L'Ukraine face à la guerre ». Tapez « L'Ukraine face à la guerre podcast ». Vous allez retrouver le podcast que j'anime et vous allez trouver là Jonathan Delporte, il livre son témoignage. Aujourd'hui, son unité a besoin d'une voiture de type 4x4. Si vous voulez le soutenir, voilà, allez sur adressez une demande, je vais vous donner le QR code où on trouve le PayPal ou les coordonnées bancaires pour acheter, par exemple, cette voiture pour votre camarade français, Jonathan Delporte.
Thank you so much, Tetiana. I've seen a number of hands, but unfortunately we're over time for the panel, so please join me in thanking Tetiana, Edward, and Alexandre for a terrific, terrific panel. Thank you.